4 days. That's how long most people would grieve before quitting everything. Before walking away from the sport. Before deciding that no dream is worth burying your child for. Clay Millican didn't get 4 days. He got 4 days to bury his son Dalton, and then he was back in the cockpit of a Top Fuel dragster doing 330 miles per hour, strapped into a machine designed to explode in controlled fury down a quarter-mile of asphalt. That's where he chose to process the worst moment of his life, sitting in a metal coffin on wheels, holding the throttle wide open while his 22-year-old son was 6 feet under the ground in Drummond, Tennessee. On August 13, 2015, Dalton Millican died in a single-person motorcycle accident near his hometown. He was living the same life his father had taught him to live, wide open, fearless, in love with the throttle. The irony would destroy most people. Instead, it defined Clay's next decade. Dalton wasn't just Clay's son. He was his legacy walking around on 2 feet. While Clay was chasing his NHRA dreams in a dragster, Dalton was behind the wheel of Blue Thunder on the Monster Jam Tour. He won an ATV national championship. He skateboarded. He built things with his hands. He was the kind of kid who could light up an entire room just by walking into it. The kind of young man that everyone who knew him said would have done something extraordinary. But extraordinary doesn't matter when a motorcycle meets a Tennessee backroad at the wrong angle. Extraordinary doesn't matter at all when you're 22 and it's over. What happened 4 days later is the moment that separates the people who quit from the people who become something else entirely. Clay Millican returned to racing. Not because he was okay. Not because he didn't feel the weight of what had just happened. But because sitting at home feeling that weight wasn't honoring his son. It was burying himself alongside him. The NHRA community understood what was happening. Everyone knew. They watched a man who'd just lost his only son climb into a Top Fuel dragster at Brainerd, Minnesota, and push a machine that runs on rocket fuel and pure violence down a quarter-mile runway. If you've never felt the force of a Top Fuel dragster launching, imagine standing in front of a jet engine while someone floors it. Now imagine doing that 330 miles per hour, with your hands on the wheel, knowing that in the next 4.5 seconds you'll cross the finish line or you'll explode. That's what Clay chose as his grieving process. For nearly 2 years, he showed up. Every weekend. Every race. Every lap. He wasn't hiding his grief, he was channeling it into something that nobody else had the courage or the broken heart to try. His wife Donna was there. His surviving son Cale watched his father transform tragedy into fuel. The racing community watched a man refuse to quit when quitting would have been the easiest choice. He kept getting closer. Closer to that first championship win. The one he'd been chasing his entire career. Closer to something he could give to his son's memory. But the wins didn't come easy. He came up short in final rounds over and over. He lost races he should have won. He faced equipment failures that would have ended anyone else's season. He crashed and burned, metaphorically and sometimes literally. But he never quit. He never even considered it. Because somewhere in his chest, beneath the scars and the exhaustion and the never-ending grief, he was racing for Dalton. Then Father's Day came. June 18, 2017. Brainerd, Minnesota. The same track where he'd returned to racing 709 days after burying his son. 23 months. Nearly 2 full years of waking up with that weight in his chest, showing up anyway, strapping in anyway, pushing harder anyway. And on that one Sunday, in front of his home crowd, with the entire NHRA watching a story they all understood, Clay Millican crossed the finish line first. Not just first. He won. His first Top Fuel National Event Championship. After nearly 20 years of trying. After losing his son. After 709 days of racing with a broken heart. He won it on Father's Day. Nobody writes a script that perfect. Nobody could choreograph that level of timing. The universe doesn't usually deliver that kind of poetry to people who deserve it. But it did. And when Clay pulled into the winner's circle, he climbed out of that dragster and completely fell apart. Not the kind of falling apart where you're upset about anything, the kind where you're holding something so heavy for so long that when you finally set it down, your body doesn't know what to do with itself anymore. The entire NHRA paddock understood what was happening. They were watching a father's love cross a finish line that his son would never see him cross. He kissed that trophy like it was the only thing holding him to the earth. Because it was. Now Clay is 60 years old. Born February 9, 1966, he's still racing in an era where most Top Fuel drivers retired a decade ago. His reflexes are slower. His body aches differently. The sport is younger, faster, more technical every single year. And Clay Millican is still out there competing against drivers young enough to be his sons. Still showing up. Still pushing. Still honoring Dalton by refusing to accept that grief has to end your story. He's had setbacks. Brutal ones. Back-to-back engine explosions. Controversial disqualifications that cost him points and prize money. Equipment failures. Races where everything went wrong and there was nothing left to do but climb out of the car and try again next weekend. The kind of setbacks that make regular people walk away and never look back. But here's what most people don't understand about Clay Millican: the grief didn't break him. It rebuilt him into something harder, tougher, more committed to the idea that your story doesn't end when tragedy strikes. Your story transforms. At 60 years old, he carries Dalton with him to every race. To every practice. To every moment he climbs into that cockpit. He doesn't talk about it constantly, but it's there in every decision he makes, every time he chooses to get back in that seat despite everything his body is telling him to do. His wife Donna knows it. His son Cale knows it. The entire NHRA knows it. Clay Millican became the guy who proves that grief doesn't have to destroy you. Sometimes it builds you into something extraordinary. The real tragedy of Clay Millican isn't the single moment when his son crashed on that Tennessee road. The tragedy is carrying that moment for 11 years and counting. The tragedy is the infinite number of times he's had to choose, every single day, whether to keep going or give in. He chose to keep going. He chose to race. He chose to honor his son by living the fullest version of his own life possible. He chose not to die alongside his son. He chose to live for both of them. At 60 years old, Clay Millican is still out there on the track, proving that some men don't break under pressure, they become stronger. Some grief doesn't end a story. It becomes the entire story. And sometimes, if you're strong enough, if you love hard enough, if you race hard enough, you transform that grief into a legacy that your son would be infinitely proud of. On Father's Day 2017, he got his trophy. But every day since, every single day, he's been getting something bigger. The chance to keep racing. The chance to keep living. The chance to keep loving in Dalton's memory. That's the victory that never ends. That's the triumph.